if I'm designing a women only training program, I'm going to have something different than if it's a men only training program, because they're still doing the same thing. There might just be a different intention around it. And that's training. That's working with an individual. Is you need to understand where they're lacking, what their deficits are, and you need to fill that gap with some sort of action in terms of training. And even if they're on different sides of the spectrum, the intervention isn't very different, right? It might just be a little bit different intention. And that's something that I've trained with men that are very mobile, and I've trained women that are very immobile. So it's not necessarily this is a man thing, this is a woman thing. It's, these things tend to present in the population of women. These things tend to present in the population of men. But realistically, I can't generalize and say that this is a women only training principle. This is a more mobile person training principle versus is a less mobile person training principle. So that's the one thing that I would layer on top of that is like, yeah, physical presentation, like structural presentation might be a little bit different. Maybe being man or woman influences that. Maybe it doesn't. But at the end of the day, it's more around intention than it is the actual training program, because the program doesn't need to look any different. It might just be a conversation with someone that, hey, let's work through as full a range of motion as you can, because I know we're limited. But in another person, it might be, all right, I want you to control that entire range of motion. We're not going to move outside of that until we can. So there's really no difference in terms of the sheet that I send, man versus woman or person A versus person B. It's just the intention that I'm communicating to them. And I think that's a greater principle within training, is like understanding intention and being able to set the correct intention for the correct person.
Yeah, none of the gradients that you laid out have a bright line between biological sex.
Right.
Right? Like I I know men with increased Q angles and carrying angles. I know women with decreased Q angles and carrying angles. I know men with small rib cages. I know women with big rib cages. So like the idea is, and I think the takeaway is, understand how the human organism varies, and you'll understand how to train everyone. Right. And that's where, because this is where there's a departure from this high level understanding of what are the meaningful differences in humans, period. Clavicle length to femur length, right? To femur to tibia ratios. Like these are all meaningful differences that have no bright line in between, like this is a gender only bucket that only we have to worry about with male or female. Because I think that the high level principles that you laid out, that's about as in-depth as you need to go, not necessarily with a man or a woman, with just with anyone. Like these are the anatomical variations that are meaningful in the way that we would select exercises or can anticipate some ability to move through planes of motion or to have access to certain ranges of motion, to be able to control certain ranges of motion. But people are so down the rabbit hole, is like if you have to have a conversation around like, well, it's the luteal phase. And you're like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, because here's the thing. And this is what blows my mind is, and I'm not going to pick on people, but like there seems to be the majority of people who put forth the differences in training men versus women tend to be women. Women tend to stand on a soapbox and say, there's difference between us training. And it's like, okay, but you don't think men are fucking with their hormones too? Sorry, dude. Like you can sit and talk about phases and the Mercury's in retrograde and that you're a Sagittarius all you want. But I know guys that used to trend based off of mood.
Ooh, a
Little midday pick me. Imagine, like we sit around and we're like, yeah, fuck, I go for a coffee. And like, yeah, I got a spot. Let's go. Imagine just like being like, I'm a little bit not aggressive enough today. Hold on a second. Let me just fucking trend banger in the delt. It's like, okay, hormone fluctuations off of predictable cycle just means you're zoomed in too much. Because let me tell you what, with the female athletes that I've trained, and they're fucking dogs, they don't care. Right. They don't care. Because if game day shows up and you're just like, well, and yeah. Right. So like, and in the bodybuilding powerlifting world, when guys are taking their hormones into their own hands, they have no idea what they're doing. Right. Not a clue. Like
Right.
you could have days where, I mean, if you looked at the concentration of their estradiol or their T3 or their testosterone on any particular day, you know, they went out, they boozed it up at the club, or the guys are blowing half the city up their nose, and they wake up the next morning with a little trend pick me up, and it's just like, we have no idea the preparedness or hormonal state of most guys taking anabolic steroids.
Well, well, the consideration that I have around that is not even a consideration because it all standardizes itself if you're working within relative intensities, if you're working with perceived exertion, right? RPE8 is still RPE8, no matter which phase of the menstrual cycle you're in, no matter which phase of your trend cycle you're in, right? Our RPE is still, it still holds true, and autoregulation is how I run all of my training. It's not, you know, linear progression week over week. We're not going to add 5 pounds, add 2 reps. It's all right. We're going to train hard today, or we're going to train at a specific rate of perceived exertion, no matter what that is. And that's something that, yeah, it will fluctuate throughout the month or throughout the trend cycle that you're on, but but the overall progression doesn't need to change based on man, woman, whatever, because we're already equating for that because we're training at a specific rate of perceived exertion, and that's just auto regulation, right? I think that's responsible training. Like, you know, we've worked with athletes that, you know, they'll come in, they're in the off season and they're in Florida, and Tampa somehow is the strip club capital of the world, and they were out until 3 a.m. and they're going to come to the gym 7 a.m. for the morning workout, and they slept 1 hour in their Mercedes truck in the parking lot.
You had to bring up the Mercedes truck. He's gonna know who you're. He's gonna know you're talking about him, right?
You think
Like,
he's going to listen to this stuff?
Odyssey 2001. He's gonna definitely know. Oh man, yeah. If he listens to this, I will fucking die. If I get a DM from him, be like, "Yo, bro, what the fuck?" Yeah, with your fuzzy bear claw slippers on, you know who you are, motherfucker.
Oh shit!
I honestly heard him say once that he likes supporting single mothers. I'm like, dude, you can't say that, bro.
Yo, he's just
Anyway.
a charitable guy, you know?
Funny, dude. Oh my god, you had to go with the Mercedes. Yeah, I knew exactly who you're talking about. But to your point,
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's auto regulation is going to kick in no matter who it is. It doesn't matter on age, gender, sex, whatever, however you want to split it. Like, that's just responsible training, right? We're going to push it as far as we can push it, or as far as we need to push it, or we're going to hold it back where we need to, based off of how we're feeling on that given day. And we're going to give some sort of relative percent of effort that is appropriate to continue progressing long term. And that's just what training should look like, right? It's not necessarily a consideration of, you know, is this a woman in front of me? Is this a man? Is this, you know, it doesn't really matter.
yeah, I think the big takeaway here for people who lean into this idea of women as a special population is like, do you cover the big rocks of variance that scale across the human organism first? Because most people just go like, oh, what are all these pelvis and rib cage and carrying and Q angles and what? No, I'm gonna move out of the way. I want to be obscure and I want to be different. I'm just going to go talk about, like, you know, the luteal phase or something. And you're like, but do you know how to, like, identify rib cage orientation? Do you know how rib cage orientation actually sets the stage for, like, people being able to move through the transverse versus sagittal versus frontal? No, you just decided to pick up a physiology book and start writing content on the internet about training females, and you want to sound smart, but you don't even know the basics around training people, period. So it's like, that's what we need to get back to. It's like, it was when you understand, like, okay, if I'm coaching someone, I'm coaching a human. Great. I need to know the principles of human resistance training.
Yeah.
And if you get those right, everything else is going to fall the wayside as far as relevance. It's like, you got 90 minutes, maybe you have 60 minutes, 4 to 7 times a week, depending on, or maybe even more if you're in the Olympic weightlifting space. And it's like, at the end of the day, you're sort of just playing the person, not playing the man. We're playing the person. And it's like, if you see someone struggling with technique, it's like, all right, well, that's a breakdown. We're probably approaching a 1 rep max. That's your relative intensity. Okay, cool. But I think the thing, and I want to reiterate it before we kind of switch into like geriatrics or kids, is that a lot of people step over, to use a Stan Effordingism, step over the $100 bills of basic general training principles of people to start to collect these shiny objects of like, I'm using my training ideology to show you that I'm well read on specifics of endocrine function of females. It's like, yeah, but no, sorry, we're in the gym actually. So we're over here where the weights are. So those shiny little red objects that you pick up and are about, like, yeah, those are words for sure, and those are a lot of them. But we're in the gym, so it's like be mindful of like what are you stepping over in lieu of these big rocks to show that like I understand female endocrine physiology. It's like, okay, and we're trying to work out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Old
feel it.
people,
Old people. Yeah. I
oh,
I know. I've trained a lot of old people in my day. Uh, so as we start to look at special populations as it pertains to age, I think there's, and old people specifically, before we get to young people, there's maybe two things I think that make this population different that are still training considerations. I'm sorry. There's two things I think may be more complex in this population that is still a consideration with every population that I train, and that is skill level, their training skill and experience, and prior injuries. Right? Someone has lived longer, they've had more time to fuck up their body, and that's something that I'm probably going to make training considerations around for anyone that I'm training, but it seems to be more prevalent in an older population just because they've spent more time in their body. So with those two things, like they're not any different than any other person that I would train, uh, male, female, they, them, child, elderly. It's all like you could put anyone in this category. If you're in front of me and I'm doing an assessment, these are questions I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you, what is your training history? Have you played any sports in the past? Do you have any major injuries? Do you have any like chronic considerations, things that are, do you have a knee that's chronically flared up? Do you have a shoulder? Do you have a back issue? Like what's been going on before you came into me that I need to consider in this session. And that's something that I find to be more prevalent in the older population, but I don't think that's any different than any other population that I would train, right? Is I need to know where you've been so that I can figure out where we can start, right? And between prior training history and skill level, those are the two variables that, again, I'm going to figure out with every single person I'm doing an assessment with. But it may be a little different in an elder population just because of the time that they've lived in their body, right? What training have they done? What training haven't they done? The longer you go without training, the more untrained you are, the more deconditioned you are. That might mean that we have to start with more regressed movements, right? You might not have access to range of motion. So we might be using more external support or spending more time working on regressed variations of something that I were using with someone that is 35 or someone that is 12 or 8 years old. So that's a consideration for everyone that I train, but that's something that there's probably going to be a little bit more history in those two columns for someone that is a bit older, just because they simply have more time under their belt. They've had more time to either be training or not be training. They've had more time to either have injuries or not have injuries. So again, it's the same sentiment. It's not necessarily a conversation around their age. It's a conversation around them and where they've been and what their training has looked like. And that's a conversation I'm going to have with every single person that I work with, whether they're an NFL player, whether they're a video gamer, whether they're a computer programmer. It doesn't matter who they are or how old they are. That's something that, okay, I'm going to talk to you about this because this is going to inform our training. And that, like I said before, that's just responsible training. That's a reasonable intake process to have with someone. But there's probably going to be a little bit more history in those columns versus someone that is younger.
I think the biggest enemy to old people right now is other old people. Like, and what I mean by that is there's a movement of boomers that are gaining an audience and talking to other boomers from a point of authority not licensed to them by the field of resistance training. There's like orthopedic surgeon. I'm thinking of one lady in particular, and it's like, if my mom had like was listening to this lady on a podcast, I would like take a personal offense to it, because one of the things that I'm seeing right now is I'm watching old people who are authorities in our space, and I'll air quote authorities. I'll watch them. I can watch them learn about resistance training in the same way. I can watch a 55-year-old MD, a man that has a big podcast, and I could say a few more things and we know exactly who I'm talking about. I can watch him learn about resistance training with the shit that he talks about, the
Yep.
same way I watched 16-year-old me learned about resistance training.
Yep.
But guess what? 16-year-old was over half of a lifetime of learning ago, and I know way more about resistance training now than I did with 16. But I'm watching this doctor learn how to learn basics about resistance training, and it's the same basics I learned when I was 16. The only difference is he has a platform with millions and millions of subscribers and followers, and he learns it at noon and records about it at 3 o'clock.